In this video, we're going to look at biodiversity for AS biology. And biodiversity is a measure of, I suppose, the richness of species in a particular habitat, or the diversity of species, or the number of different species in a particular habitat. Many key terms to have a look at here. So if we talk about species richness versus species diversity, okay, we can see here that the richness is equal. So you've got 3 different species within this habitat. You've also got 3 different species within this habitat. Okay, so there's equal species richness between the 2 habitats. But in terms of the diversity, or I suppose the biodiversity, then this one's got a lower biodiversity because it's more dominated by this one species. Whereas there's a higher biodiversity on the right-hand side here because we've got sort of equal numbers of each of the 3 species. So low diversity, high diversity, equal species richness because you've got 3 of each. Okay, so we talk about species diversity in terms of the number of different species within a habitat, of a variety of species in a particular habitat and their relative abundance in that habitat as well. It's measured using something called Simpson's index, and that's how we measure biodiversity. And it's this equation where D, which is Simpson's index, is this sigma means the sum of Ni is the total number of organisms of an individual species multiplied by n minus 1. So it's the sum of all of those divided by big N, where big N is the total number of organisms of all of the species added up together, multiplied by that number, take away 1. Okay, and D ranges from 1 to 0. The value 0 is infinite biodiversity. So the closer the value is to 0, the greater the biodiversity of that area. Okay, and there's an example we can see here between 2 different habitats. So you've got species A to F. You've got the number of the individual species here. There's 6 species in habitat A, only 4 species in habitat B. Okay, there's a total of 34 individuals in habitat A, 46 in habitat B. Now, if we were to work out using this Simpson's index calculation, habitat A, so you've got 5 multiplied by n minus 1 is 4, 7 by 6, 3 by 2, 9 by 8, 6 by 5, and 4 by 3, and you're adding those all up, divided by the total number, which is big N, is 34 multiplied by 33, which gives you the sum of those is 182, divided by 1,122 gives you 0.16. Whereas for habitat B, you only have those 4 species. So it would suggest, and it's dominated by 2 here, you can see that would suggest that the biodiversity is lower in habitat B. But to do the calculation again, you have 3 come up here multiplied by 2, 17 times 16, 7 times 6, 19 plus 18, all added up. You've got a total of 46 multiplied by 45, gives you 662 divided by 2070, which gives you a Simpson's index value of 0.32. Okay, so if you remember, the smaller number is the higher biodiversity. And looking at these numbers, you can tell that habitat A is more biodiverse. There's a greater number of species, there's greater species richness, but there's also sort of equal numbers of each species compared to species B or habitat B, which only has 4 species, but dominated by 2 of them. So habitat A is more biodiverse than habitat B because its Simpson's index number is closer to 0. Okay, then we go on and talk about species diversity. So species diversity, as talked about there, is sort of different numbers of species. You've also got ecosystem diversity in terms of the different types of ecosystems or different types of habitats within an ecosystem. So you might have a marine one, you might have polar, mountains, regions, grassland, deserts, forests, obviously not in the same area, but you have within the world, you have many different types of ecosystems, and some animals and plants are adapted to live in those and some aren't. Okay, you also have genetic diversity, which, as it suggests, is to do with the genes within a particular population or particular community, and really that's the genetic variability of the species. And here you can see lots of giraffes with different colors, so there must be a reasonably large genetic diversity or different types of genes within that particular species. And genetic diversity is a good thing, because then if there's a disease or if there's something that wipes out part of the population, you might have, because of their different genes, you would have organisms that maybe aren't susceptible to that disease. Okay, again, something similar in this one. You can see the genetic diversity, so the diversity of the genes. The species diversity is the different number of species. Within the ecosystem diversity, you've got different types of habitats, you've got different environments, which is linked to the abiotic and biotic factors affecting that particular habitat. The populations would be dependent on those different types of ecosystems, and then the community in terms of all the populations, again, would depend on the type of habitat. Okay, then we go on and talk about classification and the concept of a species. So a species is defined, as you can see at the top here, a group of individuals of common ancestry that closely resemble each other, so they've got similar features, and are normally capable of interbreeding to produce fertile offspring. Okay, so their offspring can produce more offspring. Okay, and species are affected by a number of different things: their physical features, their behavior, their ecological niche we've talked about in the adaptations video, their biochemistry in terms of their DNA, etc., their physiology in terms of how the inside workings of the body affect them as well. Okay, examples: tigers and lions are a different species. Now they can interbreed to produce something called a liger, but a liger is infertile. It doesn't produce offspring. So therefore a tiger and a lion are seen as a different species. Similar is the horse and the donkey, which can interbreed to produce a mule. Mule again is infertile. So therefore the horse and the donkey are considered to be a different species. Okay. Now, then we go on and talk a little bit about taxonomy in terms of how we refer to particular organisms and how we classify particular organisms. And for that, you can see here 3 different types of bear. So the bear name, or genus name, if you like, or generic name, is Ursus, whereas their species name, because they are different species, polar brown and Asian bear, Asian black bear, they have got a different species name. Okay, now we look at taxonomy in terms of the groupings that particular organisms belong to. So you have their species, you have their genus that they belong to, then similar genus will belong to the same family, then similar families will belong to the same order, similar orders will belong to the same class, which belong to the same phylum, which belong to the same kingdom. Okay, so you have your animal kingdom or your plant kingdom or whatever it is. Okay, the way to remember the order of these: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species, which is sometimes what you have to put in exam papers, is there are many ways to remember it, but one you can see at the side here is keep plucking chickens or fear getting sacked. So the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. To be honest, it doesn't really matter how you remember it, as long as you do remember that order. And this can be seen, particular question that's come up before. So you're given the red squirrel, Scurius vulgaris, so that's its genus name, and its species name, which is native to Ireland, is related to chipmunks, marmots, and prairie dogs, and is included in a taxonomic group called Scuridia. All Scuridia belong to the group of mammals called Rodentia. Okay, so then you have to complete the table. So there, the genus name and the species name is the Scurius vulgaris. They belong to, as it says, the same family or similar group called the Scuridia. Those Scuridia belong to a group of mammals, which are called Rodentia. So then the Rodentia and the mammals, and you can see the keep clucking chickens or fear getting sacked. So that's your phylum is chordates or backbone, animals with a backbone. Okay, if you were to discover or trying to identify a new species, then there are a number of different ways that we can do that. So we can look at its morphology or its anatomy, so its external features. You're trying to relate it to species that you already know. So it can be that you would look at its external features and see how that relates to organisms that we already know. You could look at its cell structure. Is it prokaryotic? Is it eukaryotic? You could look at its biochemistry and take some samples in terms of its biochemical basis, and do they contain carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins that you find in other organisms? What's its DNA like or similar to in terms of other organisms? So we can class things or group things into the same sort of species that we already know. Okay, and when we're talking about species that we already know, we can class these into 5 different kingdoms. So the 5 different kingdoms you can see in front of you there. So plants, animals, fungi, productista, and prokaryotes. Okay, so you need to know some of the facts about each of these. These were the sort of earlier ancestors, and then we diversified as these organisms evolved over a long period of time. And then we have these 5 kingdoms now that we can classify organisms into. Okay, so with prokaryotes, bacteria is the obvious example. Okay, they have naked DNA or DNA which is not surrounded by a nuclear membrane. It lies free in the cytoplasm. The ribosomes tend to be smaller than eukaryotic cells. Cell walls are present, although they're not made of cellulose. They're made of peptid ligands, and they also don't have microtubules, and they divide by fission, which is basically splitting into 2. Okay, and some examples of kingdom prokaryotes are bacteria and green algae. There's some others. You can pause the video to take a look at those. They may have flagellum, etc. as well. They may have a slime capsule around the outside. So those are the sort of simplest organisms, if you like, in terms of kingdom prokaryotes. The next kingdom then is looking at productista, okay, and these are eukaryotic. Okay, all the remaining kingdoms are eukaryotic. They tend to be unicellular or multicellular. Some of them are heterotrophs, in which that means they can obtain food from others. Okay, so they will digest and tends to be extracellular digestion, so they'll produce enzymes to break down food, and then they'll absorb that. Some are autotrophs, in which case they can photosynthesize. Okay, and there's an example there of a paramecium, which is a productistan, which is heterotrophic. So it has cilia, which allow it to move. It's got digestive vacuoles, which allow it to containing ingested bacteria, so it can take in those food substances and break them down. You can see there as well, it's got a contractile vacuole for water regulation, so it can get rid of water within its cell so that it doesn't burst or doesn't lyse. Okay, the next one then is looking at kingdom fungi. Okay, so again, it's eukaryotic in terms of its cell makeup. It's a lysotroph, which means that it's a decomposer or saprotroph. It has cell walls which are made of chitin. They tend to be multinucleate fungi, and they produce hyphae, which we can see on the left here, which is how it sort of spreads around. It's composed of these filaments called hyphae and not divided into separated cells. They tend to be larger organisms. Okay, digestion is extracellular, so they will digest things outside of the fungi. So they produce enzymes to break it down, and then they reabsorb or absorb those soluble products back inside. Okay, and some examples of those you can see here. Mold is an example of a fungi. You've got fungus that grows on trees. Mushrooms are also examples of fungi as well. Okay, the next one, again, a bit more complicated, is kingdom Plantae, or plants. Again, they're eukaryotic cells. So they have proper cell organelles, nucleus with a membrane around it, etc. They're autotrophic in that they photosynthesize and produce their own food. They're multicellular, and they possess chlorophyll in their chloroplasts, which allows them to photosynthesize. And they have a cellulose cell wall, or the cell wall around the cells is made of cellulose. Examples there you can see are ferns, mosses, holly, larger plants, bushes, etc. Conifers, large trees, being examples as well. And then the last one is animal kingdom, or kingdom Animalia. Again, eukaryotic, they're multicellular, they're heterotrophic, which means they can't make their own food. They have to eat other things to get that food. Food is ingested into the gut cavity, so digestion is extracellular, okay, so inside, and they are capable of locomotion or capable of movement. Okay, lots of examples: mammals, birds, fish, etc. And then the alternative, the last bit that we talk about, is the alternative classification system, which is really looking at three super kingdoms, or three domains, as they talk about it. Okay, so you've got the prokaryotes, which are looking at archaea and bacteria. They sort of put in those super kingdoms. So those archaea are really the similar to bacteria, but different biochemically. And then you have eukaryotes, and the eukaryotes include the Protoctista, fungi, Plantae, and Animalia. So these super kingdoms, you have those three is the sort of alternative classification system, or domains as they talk about them. But within that, you have the five kingdoms that we've talked about already. Okay, hopefully that helped with biodiversity for AS biology.